Greek religion. Religion almost requires writings, and Greek religion might have just been spread by word of mouth until Homer wrote down about the gods and gave the Greek gods, you might say, their characteristic, their personality. Anyway, the Greek gods consist of the Olympian deities who lived on Mount Olympus. Now, folks, the Greeks were not entirely idiotic. I mean, they had climbed Mount Olympus, and at the top of Mount Olympus there's always a layer of clouds. It's foggy, and they realized when they got there you could not find the palaces or the city of the gods, but they believed the gods resided around the corner in another dimension, in a spiritual realm, outside human senses. But nevertheless, they believed that the gods lived on Mount Olympus, the chief of whom was Zeus. He was the god of thunder. And Zeus had two brothers. They were Poseidon and Hades. And these three, once they had overcome their wicked father Saturn, and Saturn had also overcome Uranus before this time. What's that? Kronos. Thank you. I stand correctly again. Yeah, Kronos. Once that Zeus had these three brothers overcome Kronos, they divided the universe among them. Zeus was younger than his brothers, but somehow, due to a contest or some agreement, he wound up getting the world of the senses. Yes?
I know this one, I can tell you. They got, so this is legitimate in Greek culture. They would have basically picking straws. The shortest straw, gets the most. So whoever got the biggest straw gets, this was legitimate. This is basically a contract back in Greek culture. So biggest straw gets the first pick. Zeus obviously got the first one, picked the heavens. Poseidon got the middle one, picked the seas, and then Hades got stuck with the underworld.
Yeah, okay. Now that's what someone in the early classes said. Lottery, by lot. It would seem like a fair way to divide up the universe among them. Yeah, by lottery. Hades then was the underworld, the world of the dead, and the Greeks, a few Greeks who died heroes got to go to a place of bliss or paradise. For most of the average Greeks, Hades was a place for zombies where you did not talk, could not see, could not hear, could not eat. You lived, but you passed an aimless existence that would never end. And some people believe that this was one reason that Christianity was to have such appeal, because Christianity offered a happy afterlife for everyone. The earlier mythologies, the Sumerian mythologies, the Greek and Roman mythologies did not offer much of a happy afterlife for most people. Egypt was an exception. Well, actually, Egypt only offered a happy afterlife for the wealthy and rich, the scholars, not much for the ordinary person.
What page are you on?
What's that?
What page are you on?
What I said about the afterlife is not in, I'm looking at page 109. I've now turned over to page 110. Now, they practiced a lot of rituals, including sacrifice. Now, as far as we know, the Greeks never practiced human sacrifice, but they did practice animal sacrifice as a way they believed to please the gods. And they would consult with oracles. Their chief oracle was the one at Delphi. And I've already mentioned the oracle at Delphi was the oracle that told that, at the oracle of Delphi, their god Apollo, who is the son of Zeus, the sun god, Apollo told Oedipus' family that he was going to grow up and kill his father and marry his mother. Again, this actually happened. The oracle at Delphi. There was another famous oracle that Alexander consulted way down here in the desert in Egypt. The oracles were the places where the gods chose where they meet with humans. And you could go visit the oracle and get an answer to some question or determine as best you could what you should do. Now, folk, there have been many, many books on why the Greeks stopped believing in their gods after a certain point. I'm going to insert another one. Now, we'll talk more about this when we come to the part about the Hellenistic world. But one reason might have been that their oracles seemed to stop communicating with them. Now, if all this was fakery, they could have just continued the fakery. But it seemed like they were actually getting a divine message from the spirit world when they go visit these oracles, and all of a sudden the priests have to tell them one day, hey, Apollo's not talking to me anymore. The gods aren't speaking to us anymore. And this might have had a lot to do with why the Greeks abandoned the worship of these deities for other religions. Each city-state had its own god. In the case of Sparta, their god was Ares. The Romans called him Mars, the god of war. Now, Ares had two servants, Deimos and Phobos, dread and terror. And any of you who've ever been in a war know dread and terror are part of war. Well, later we discovered the planet Mars has two moons, which we named Deimos and Phobos. Did the ancients know that Mars had two moons? Whatever. Ares was the god of Sparta. For the Athenians, their god was Athena, goddess of wisdom. For Corinth, their god was Aphrodite. The Romans called her Venus, the brightest star in the heavens, except for the moon. Goddess of fertility, goddess of sex, goddess of love. Again, Corinth worshipped Aphrodite above the others. Each city-state had its own patron deity. And when Christianity came along, each each community would have its own patron saint. And to some extent still do, at least in certain branches of Christianity. Now, these messages that they got from the oracles were sometimes deceptive. For instance, your book mentions Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia. Croesus wondered if he should go fight the Persian Empire. So Croesus sent to the oracle at Delphi. I mean, these oracles were scattered far and wide. Again, had they been fakery folk, pure fakery, they could have put them any old place. But the oracle at Delphi said, if you go fight the Persians, you will destroy a great empire. So Croesus went to fight the Persians, but guess what? It was his own great empire that was destroyed, and not the Persian Empire. So the gods could sometimes be... The gods' answers were vague, like, it will be sunny today unless it turns cloudy. I mean, their answers... Well, also, now, in the case of Philip of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great, he asked the oracle at Delphi, should he go fight the Persians? And the oracle replied, the bull is ready. The sacrifice is ready to be killed. Well, who was the sacrifice that was ready to be killed other than the king himself, who was killed shortly thereafter? Alexander's father was killed shortly thereafter, Philip of Macedon. So it was like he was the bull that was ready to be killed. Again, sometimes these messages were vague at best, and not really specific, and you could interpret them, anything they said you could interpret any way you wanted to, and you would believe what you chose to believe. All right. The economy, one thing I remember about the economy of Greece, because Greece has such terrible farmland, it's mostly mountainous, rocky, and hilly, and not very fertile, the Greeks had to develop a system of trade in which they imported a lot of their foodstuffs and traded for stuff that they produced, like olive oil. They traded their wares for wares from other places. And trade was a big part of their economy. I've already mentioned family relationships, so this takes us up to the rise of Macedonia. Before we get to Macedonia, though, I want to run through briefly some things that were going on in Greece before Philip came down, Philip of Macedon. The Greeks were fighting among themselves for hegemony, and they thought if only one city-state could overpower all of them, we'd have peace. And they were eventually getting tired of the wars. Well, they kept fighting and fighting. At one point, all the Greeks got in two big camps, and they thought the winner will rule over the loser. Well, instead, it was a ball draw. Neither side won. Sparta believed that they should have the rule, like they'd had for a while during the Peloponnesian War. But Sparta one time, and this was inevitable, folks, when you depend on the sword. Sparta met an enemy. The enemy had 6,000 men. Sparta had 10,000. You could pick the winner, except the Theban general, their opponent was Thebes. The Theban general figured if he could get around their right, and he got the brilliant idea, instead of putting my flank 6 men deep, I'll put my flank 50 men deep and have them hit the right side really, really hard. So his 50-man deep flank destroyed the Spartans' right flank and began to hack away at the Spartan soldiers. Well, the Spartan general realized what had happened, so he thought, hey, my men have been outflanked, they're being hacked away while they stand disciplined, So he got the idea, what I'll do is I'll call a retreat. And once my men have retreated, I'll reform them, reorganize them, and I'll go back to the battle and fight again. There was one problem, the Spartans were trained too well. When the order to retreat was given, half the Spartans ordered, my daddy never, my grandfather, my great-grandfather never retreated. I'm not going to retreat either. So half of them retreated, half of them didn't. And the half of them that didn't stayed behind and were mauled. Because they were not only being hit from the side, they were by this time disorganized because their line was broken. So the half of them that didn't retreat were mauled. So basically chaos reigned in the Spartan camp. The next day a peacemaker came along and urged the two sides to quit fighting. Sparta went home unaware that while they were gone, the Messenians, their slaves, had gotten together 2 or 3 other city-states on their side, and the Spartan soldiers who were wounded and sore were outnumbered about 5 or 6 to 1. But hey, we can't fight these slaves right now. So they had to come to, unthinkably, they had to negotiate with their own slaves. Well, shortly after, a big earthquake struck, and it left the Helots alone, but the earthquake killed 25,000 Spartans. If that weren't enough, the Spartan couples were practicing birth control because they could not afford to send their children to the academy that was required. In other words, when you had a child, you had to. All right, some places, like in the United States, if you have children, you get a tax break. In Sparta, if you had a child, you just had to pay extra taxes. So the Spartan couples were, hey, we're better off without children, so guess what? After a time, their Helots outnumbered them 5 to 1, 6 to 1. Then the Helots realized, hey, the ones that had moved away. Several Helots escaped to other Greek city-states, but they started coming back. 7 to 1, 8 to 1, and the Spartans then had to live in fear that the Helots were going to come on them any time because there was no barrier between Sparta and the Helot land. So Sparta eventually fell from power during this time. Thebes rose up in power for a while. Even Corinth and Athens rebuilt itself. But then into this scenario, the Macedonians built up a big empire under Philip. And when Philip threatened the Greeks, and here's the fair democracy, the Greeks, instead of uniting to fight, debated. Half the Greeks were for Philip, said, hey, we'd be better off under Philip, he could bring peace. And this became one of the reasons democracy got a bad name. I mean, hey, it almost happened during World War II when Hitler was about to invade Great Britain. A high percent of British said, let's let Hitler have us rather than fight. I mean, Hitler won't be so bad. I mean, after all, he brought Germany out of the Depression. Rather than fight, let's let Hitler run over us. This almost happened. In the case of the Greeks, it did happen. Philip of Macedon was able to come down with half the city-states on his side anyway. He conquered the Greeks and united them, something that had not been done since Homeric times, if it had even been done then. Philip united the Greeks. In the course of Philip took on a new wife each spring. He'd go out and conquer some territory and then take a wife of the royalty of that particular place he conquered. And one of the wives he took was a woman named Olympias. And Olympias had a son named Alexander. whom we know as Alexander the Great. The problem was Olympias was not a Macedonian. And that meant that if Philip ever had a son who was from a Macedonian wife, this son would inherit the throne, and Alexander would be bypassed. This upset Alexander and Olympias very much. In fact, wound up Olympias and Alexander had Philip's son killed, as Philip did, in fact, have a son by a Macedonian wife who would have inherited the throne, except there was a little twist of events. Now, folk, Alexander, among other things, believed he was descended from Zeus, but he wound up claiming that Zeus was his father. There's a story. All right, this story is told in a documentary, The True Story of Alexander the Great, that showed on History Channel some years ago. A story that Philip peeked into Olympias' bedroom one night, peeked in through the keyhole, and saw a huge serpent slither up to his wife's bed and basically envelop her. And he was really afraid of her at that point. So he went to the oracle, and the oracle said, what you saw was Zeus. Honor Zeus with all your might, but the eye with which you peeked through the peephole, you're going to lose sight of in a short time. A short while later, Philip engaged in battle, and he was hit by some kind of a weapon, and his right eye was destroyed. So he had to live the rest of his life with one eye. Philip believed that Alexander's real father was Zeus. Again, you can handle this, folk, any way you want to, but do the research yourself. Alexander wound up, once he went to Egypt, visiting an oracle in Egypt, and the oracle told him, Philip is not your father is in fact Zeus. And again, this is one of the few times an oracle gave a real answer. I don't want to say honor, but a real answer.